Welcome to episode 210 of Trek Live. Running a couple minutes late. We're injecting some, hopefully, pretty good, you know, I'm not going to say like amazing production value, but a
Oh,
little
very
extra
much.
something to a little visual aid for our conversation today. How you doing this morning, Dan?
Doing great. Really excited to unload and talk about some of these this big batch of TOS episodes that Bill and I have been cruising through. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I think as we move forward with Trek Live, now that we're starting new rewatches and we're kind of synced up, we're a couple episodes off from each other, but much more aligned than we've really ever been. I think we're going to emphasize doing this every so often. Maybe every few shows, we're going to pop in and just kind of talk about where we are. Do an extended rewatch recap. When we're not doing an extended full episode recap, we'll still touch on things before we get into the topic of the week most times. But I think it'll be cool to kind of give our rewatches some love and to engage in some more extended conversations about some of the episodes that really stand out to us, especially since we're hitting them around about the same time. Touch on some things like rankings. Dan's, as he's talked about, edging into that for the first time. I do it every time, of course. So this is our first one. There's going to be a playlist on our channel that is going to have these videos as they get added as we go to kind of track these updates. This is the first one after our kickoff video a couple episodes ago. So looking forward to it. This is definitely one of the things that I'm kind of enjoying as like kind of a new wrinkle with the rewatch. Being aligned with you, Dan, is like a big change, and kind of not just watching these episodes in a vacuum. I'm really looking forward to being able to watch them and then come on here and have somebody to talk to, like not just me share my own thoughts, but like actually almost like they're new episodes doing course heading or something, get to like chat about what we both took away from some of them. I don't know that I don't think today we're gonna like touch on every single one and go in depth review on all these episodes. We'd be here for a long time, but just kind of like broadly what sticks out to us out of this first batch of 18 or 20, and we're gonna flash up our rankings at some point along the way here. Dan's will be under him on the video stream. Mine will be under me. For those of you interested in that, as we kind of get through it. I'm not hearing you, Dan.
Can you hear
There
me
we go.
now?
Yep.
Okay. So if we were in Starfleet, this would be like our personal logs. Like
Yeah.
any highlights that we want to mention, they would come up in this kind of discussion.
Definitely.
Some housekeeping things. Bill's going to create a playlist. So
Mm-hmm.
once we get into a few episodes of this, they'll be all together. To be easy to be able to be located on our channel. If you're going through your rewatch, maybe say 6 months to a year down the road, you'll still be able to come back to these and see what our thoughts are on these batch of episodes. So helps.
Yeah. I hope people take that, and maybe it'd be cool to be like a companion for somebody,
Yeah,
watching through
yeah.
on their own time. But yeah, that playlist will be there, and we hope to, like I said, keep doubling back to this and giving the rewatch it's real due. It's going to drive a lot of our conversations over the next foreseeable future, I think. Um, so you're 18 in. We're like a month into this now. I think we started this right around maybe a little less than a month, around August 10th, I think, 11th,
10th,
12th, something like that.
11th, yeah,
We
that
we,
weekend.
we watched The Man Trap. What do you think? We're more than halfway through season one, both of us, and we're chugging along. What are your kind of overall takeaways being back in the TOS?
I love being back in TOS. I just am constantly reminded of how consistent the first season is.
Yeah.
Even when there's some episodes that I don't necessarily love,
Mm-hmm.
they are still something that I can take away from them. Or New Track has totally flipped the perspective on some of these episodes, so
Yeah.
that's always good to see. The thing that I'm really noticing, two things actually, is there is a lot of stories that have like higher being type of
Oh yeah.
perspectives that they go
Hmm.
into, which is kind of a constant theme in TOS in general. But
Hmm.
um, also, the big three is so it's perfect. It's
Hmm.
what I mean by the big three is Kirk is kind of in the middle. Spock is the logical side of the brain,
Hmm.
and McCoy is kind of like the emotional, irrational type of reaction to things. And so I think that's on full display in this season, and
Yeah.
it's just really awesome. And there's some really great casual moments that I love, especially like after an episode, they've kind of been consistently coming back to the bridge of them just kind of just being really casual. So I really like this first batch of TOS.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I do think we've seen. I think we're at the point now. Uh, we're not watching in production order, but if we were, I think you could more clearly maybe see a sort of change in tone happen. Those first, I think maybe talked about this in either the last show or maybe in our kickoff, as we're kind of thinking ahead to TOS. But um, that first batch of episodes are typically really serious. Not a lot of humor. They take themselves very, very seriously. And from like the behind the scenes perspective, when Gene Coon becomes like the head writer, one of his kind of hallmarks was injecting humor, and I think using that big three that you're talking about, the sort of the the witty dialogue between the three of them, McCoy and Spock having arguments and Kirk having to kind of moderate those discussions and incorporate both sides into his own decision making, but using humor to kind of do that becomes more of a personality trait of the show. And I feel like around Shore Leave, the Squire got this. The episodes I just watched Tomorrow's yesterday. You haven't hit that one yet. Uh, Humor is a much more comfortable asset for the show around the point we're kind of getting into with season one, and it kind of holds that through season two. Season three gets a little tonally inconsistent too because of people leaving the show and different writers and stuff. Uh, but I think when people think of TOS, that tongue-in-cheek sense of humor and the banter between those three main characters is such a defining trait that I think it's been fun over these first handful of episodes to watch kind of develop in the show to find its footing and confidence to let that be its thing. Um, so that's definitely been a big takeaway from me, kind of just branching off of what you said about the big three, which is yeah, I mean, I think TOS is when you really boil it down. I know I've said this before on Trek Live. It really is a show about logic, emotion, and how those two things work together in the form. Like
Yes.
it really is. Like
Yeah.
I love the shots of there are a couple of times in episodes where you see Kirk sitting in the chair and literally like Spock over his left shoulder and McCoy over his right shoulder. It's like consciously these two personality ideas and approaches to problem solving like in one ear each, and him having to sit there and take both into account and mix the two together to find the best answer to problems. Um, and I think maybe more than any of the other shows, it has that like defining this is what the show is. This is kind of what it wants to be about. And that's what a lot of these episodes are kind of getting at. But the other thing you said is totally true, I think, especially in season one. There are a lot of episodes that feature all powerful, like dealing with like the god complex. The you know something that's far more advanced than you seems almost like a god. The advancement that they have and their power over you. And I think that's Gene Roddenberry. I think must have had that as like a defining principle of the show, that as we go out into the universe and explore what we don't understand, there are inevitably going to be more advanced, you know,
Beings
entities,
than us.
beings than
Yeah.
us, and we're not the big kids in the block. Like we're just kind of edging out there, and we have no idea what we're gonna find, and there are gonna be things that can like swat at us like a fly, and I think I give the show credit for you know that what you said is true. They do return to that idea a lot, but I do think that a lot of these episodes have different perspectives on that. Charlie X is a different episode tonally than Squire of Gothos, even though they are kind of exploring similar themes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Squire of Gothos, especially, I love the twist in that that it's a
Yeah, that
kid.
he's an adolescent. Yeah,
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 and he's
yeah. I love
playing
that every
with
time. Yeah.
toys, right? Um, but yeah, it's definitely returning to a common theme, especially in season one. I think I feel like just thinking ahead to season two. I feel like we're gonna say as we're getting through season two that maybe that's a little less present as a constant. Like there's maybe a few less episodes that deal heavily with that idea. But season one, it's definitely a returning hallmark um, thematically. Um, any other kind of general takeaways that you kind of want to touch on? Things that kind of stand out as broad strokes?
I will say that there are some elements of TOS that maybe because I feel like I see a lot of people on Twitter talk about how they can't get past the production value of TOS.
Yeah.
And and my kind of comment to that is you have to remember that this show is made for 12-inch TV, like these small little
On
TVs, and
antennas, black and white,
yeah,
probably being
yeah.
watched
So
on.
you're not gonna get the clearest
Yeah.
um connection and all these. It's just I just hope people remember that and
And
just
it's
focus on the storyline, not the production value, which is hard because the production value is so high nowadays in track
yeah,
that it just makes it tough sometimes.
but it's also important to remember it's 56 years old. Like it's this these shows are they have a lot of wrinkles. Like they were produced decades ago, and to me, maybe it's because I live in my own headspace of like loving old movies and I've
Yeah,
grown up with TOS kind of in my head all the time. I watch it and a lot of the time I'm my brain goes to if you were watching this in 1967 it kicked you know what like
yeah.
it's well done for that time. Put on other contemporary stuff from the mid 1960s and TOS stands right there with a lot of that content. You know, like there's a reason I think it stood the test of time. And I mentioned in my Twitter review of Arena, you know, a lot of people talk about how kind of hokey and corny the Gorn fight is, and how you know how the cheese value of that has kind of become iconic and stood the test of time in its own way. But the opening of that episode, the action sequence with the production value of the blown up Starfleet colony all around,
And the
like the
mortars coming down. Yeah,
yeah, that's really well done for 1960s TV. It's good. It's a good action sequence. So even in that episode, you have something that is iconically corny, and is obviously a product of its time. But I think the opening in that episode is really great, and it's minimal, and it's not what they would do in Discovery or Strange New Worlds with the same
no,
action sequence, of course, but it's 56 years ago, and it holds up pretty darn well when you take all things into account. So I think TOS is a beautiful show that really holds up as a product of its time. Yes, not just in the production value, but yeah, of course, there's other things too, like when yeomen are
but
walking around the bridge with
most
coffee
people,
and.
yeah,
hmm
most people don't live in that realm though, Bill. They haven't seen those older films and older TV
That's true.
shows.
That's true. That's true.
So
Yeah, and absolutely. If you're the content you're consuming for your entertainment is largely contemporary, like stuff that is as old as you, if you're not really going back to things that were maybe produced before you were born, then yeah, it's going to be hard, and I totally get that, and that's common. There's nothing wrong with that intrinsically. That's just a reality. But it's all a matter of perspective. It's everybody's going to respond to this stuff differently, and yeah, there are going to be people who come along to Star Trek in the years and decades ahead that are going to have a hard time with TOS for these reasons. Not just the production value stuff, but the how women are depicted at times and what their roles are. I think as time goes on, stuff like that stands out more, and some people are going to roll their eyes harder and harder as time goes on naturally. And those discussions are
yeah,
valid and they should be talked about because it is depicting a future and it's a product of the '60s, still kind of looking ahead. But if you're
and
able to, you know. Uh, take those lumps and sometimes forgive them and sometimes maybe knock an episode like Mud's Women for being too far and
way too
embracing
far.
those things too much,
Yeah,
then the show can survive, I think, the test of time. Um, but your mileage will vary undoubtedly depending on when you were born and what kind of TV and film you like to consume, and the open mindedness of each person, I think, has to be taken into account. Um, but I love it. I'm totally in. I can poo poo and kind of go like this to Mud's women, but still, you know, get by a lot of it. And
Yeah, yeah. The yeoman position is kind of
very much a '60s
yeah,
thing.
it's definitely a dated position.
Very much so.
So yeah, that's all I'll say on that. But there's also some other stuff, like Kirk says, "Leave your bigotry in your quarters." Like this, it's still really forward thinking,
Yeah, absolutely.
and really inclusive into all cultures. So we're not trying to knock the US at all.
No,
there's also some stuff that needs to be pointed out.
definitely. When Nichelle Nichols passed away, Jim Morehouse from Trek Ranks posted a bunch of GIFs and clips of like different moments. There's a scene in Court Martial, which I just watched, which you're coming up on, when the ship's kind of like falling out of orbit and they're having an issue, and the way that Uhura just like bang steps up and goes to the helm and stabilizes the orbit, and it's like unspoken, and she's just Lieutenant Uhura doing her job and being being an awesome member of the crew and a perfectly capable officer in every way. But when you go back, put yourself in 1967, if you're living in a certain perspective, you look at that and go, wait a minute, what? And that's the show is freaking awesome on that level. Lieutenant Uhura is incredible in TOS, even with minimal screen time. Just little gestures like that in episodes like Balance of Terror and Court Martial. Having just watched them, she's amazing, and that has obviously been well documented over the years as like a major component for the show success, and one of the reasons it's really become iconic. But it's true, like that's undeniable, I think.
Yeah, and we're all about positives here at Trek Live, so
that's what we're going to emphasize. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I think I'm going to throw up the rankings just to have them on the screen. When I'm curious, I've seen yours, but I didn't like study them, and I'm curious to see if we have like major disagreements, but like different placements here. It's on first glance, we have the same bottom four, if you take Court Martial out of the equation. It looks like we're pretty similar. I'm not seeing a ton that like really stands out to me as a wow, that's a major difference, which I'm not terribly surprised by. I mean, I think we've talked about episodes over the years and kind of touched on some things enough to kind of have an idea of where some of these things are going to fit. We have the same top four.
I'm higher on the Galileo 7 than you are.
Yes, true. You have it at 6. I have it at 11.
Yeah.
Out of 20. You're 6 out of 18. But yeah, Galileo 7's an interesting one. Jim from Trek Ranks also has it. I think he has it in his top 5 TOS episodes. So that's a really, depending on who you ask, that one can vary a good bit. So I think a lot of people have it kind of in the middle of the pack as like a rock solid, good episode of TOS, and there are people who have it way up there. Since that's kind of maybe the biggest difference between us, and you have it pretty high up on your list, what do you really like about the Galileo 7? Like why do you have it in your top handful?
I think it humanizes Spock.
Yeah.
I think it's the crewmen are the human emotion, and Spock is logic, and that's kind of the basic kind of setup for the episode. I love that he gets put in command. It adds some really interesting wrinkles to that we're not, because I feel like to a certain extent we really glorify Spock in TOS and in the movies, that he's arrived, that he's perfect, that he doesn't make any mistakes, that he doesn't have to work through some things. But I think modern Trek is doing a good job of seeing the younger side of Spock, seeing the more raw Spock, where he has trouble working through some emotions and things like that. And this, to me, is kind of no different. Like, you get to see him in command and kind of working through some things, and he's not perfect in this episode. So,
yeah,
I like to see him in this this type of situation. And I think this is the first time we get to see a shuttlecraft. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure.
In air date
so
order, you see I think you see one in the menagerie, but
okay.
it's really emphasized here. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a major part of the. Yeah.
So, and this kind of just lays groundwork for kind of away missions for future Trek, like take a shuttlecraft down to a planet and fight the monster of the week. That's just Star Trek to me. So,
True.
yeah, there's some good stuff in it. And I always like to, I think Jim or maybe you have pointed out this little nugget in this episode. But Spock does his own stunts in this, I think.
Mhm.
And there is a spear that, if it was just a little bit to the right, we wouldn't be having this conversation because he probably would have been impaled by this huge spear that they used in this episode. It's just, I always see that clip of him running with the crewman on his back, and it just barely misses. I just like, oh man, that's just, I love to mention that because that's just an interesting little production thing.
Yeah, it's definitely that's awesome. I don't know that I have ever noticed like how close it comes to hitting him. I'll have to go back and look, find that GIF. I'm sure it's floating around on Twitter. But no, I mean it is neat to see Spock not just in command, but in command of like a real crisis, like a true life and death kind of a situation, and watching him try to apply the principles he really believes in, that logic is the way out of these out of these problems, and it will offer the best solutions. Surrounded by people who just don't buy it at all, like surrounded by humans who are reacting to a life and death situation the way that real humans typically will. Like there's desperation, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's lack of trust, and I think you're on.
And his logic doesn't prevail.
And it does not prevail. People die.
No.
People don't make it out of there, and the other crewmen are right to point out that he some of his decisions are flawed and are not correct. And I think his decision at the end, his solution to getting out of there, is driven by emotion. I think he realizes when he's looking death in the face in the cockpit of the Galileo that he's thinking back to what he could have done differently, and I think kind of sees the error of his ways, and that's definitely key to like developing Spock early on. This is an early episode. It's one of the first episodes that I think gives Spock a lot in terms of like the leader of the episode, the kind of the driving force of the A plot. So it's definitely key on that front. And it's ambitious too. I mean, it is, like you said, it's completely the A plot's pretty much completely taking place on a planet inside of a shuttle set. Like it's not just a planet set. They have this miniature shuttle that they're coming in and out of, and they have big creatures walking around that they created with the means that they had in 1966. It's definitely an ambitious production, and I think it does mostly hold up. I like a lot of the guest stars too. I think Boma, the science officer, is no BS.
He's really good. Yeah.
He speaks truth. Like he completely sees it differently and is not afraid to give Spock his honest assessment of what's going on, and it's good. Scotty's also awesome in that episode. I think he's so like focused on
at home fixing the ship.
Yeah. He doesn't get like, and I like the way that he doesn't.
Sorry,
the shuttlecraft, right?
The ship.
It is a ship. But I love watching him like not succumb to the argument around him. Like people are kind of having these fights about what to do, and his focus is not on that. It's on getting the shuttle up and running and getting the heck out of Dodge, and finding solutions on the technical side of things.
Which I feel like is a mark of an engineer,
yeah,
being able to be so compartmentalized on the task at hand, instead of worrying about this or that or whatever quarrel that's going on around him. He's just so focused on the task at hand. I just love it.
Yeah, doesn't that kind of lay the groundwork for kind of what Scotty becomes too, like this miracle worker engineer who is like no BS, and that is what he lives for, like kind of fixing stuff in these situations. So
yeah, in the highest stakes.
yeah. So I don't know. I think people, whenever I talk about the Galileo 7, I always come away kind of putting it where I put it, kind of in the middle of the pack. But when I have conversations with people about it, who love it, whether it's you or Jim, like you right now.
Yeah, I love it.
I'm always like, maybe
Yeah.
I'm not high enough on it, and I feel like it's one of those things I never quite nail. But uh, yeah, I'm not terribly surprised that kind of stands out as a point of diversion a little bit there. Um, Trying to see what else kind of. There's a lot of similarity, especially towards the bottom. Like we have the same, pretty much, batch of episodes in that last 6 or 7. And if you look at my
Yeah.
letter grades, like other than Mud's Women with a C minus, um, Miri with a C, Dagger of Mine with C plus. There's not many stinkers in there. I think the only one that I'd kind of label as stinker is
No.
Mud's Women, and I'm looking at a C minus, and 2 weeks out from having watched it, 2.5 weeks out from watching it, I'm questioning if even the C minus is a little generous, to be honest with you.
That might be a little high. I was gonna say. Yeah, those bottom two, I think, definitely.
Oh, you have Miri lower. You actually have Miri lower than Mud's Women.
I don't like a lot of 60s child actors, and
Yeah.
the stuff with Miri and Kirk that makes me a
yeah.
little uncomfortable watching it. So
Yeah.
I think the only reason Mud's Women is barely higher is because we get Mud and Discovery, but
hmm
it's
I think
it's not good.
I think what always drives my grade up on Mud's Women a little bit from like the disastrous kind of territory, like down towards the bottom, is I think having Mud have such a legacy and he's kind of become an iconic member of that TOS kind of ensemble of guest stars who pop in, and I think I do conceptually, given the show is kind of always hatched as this like it's the old west, but it's space. Like it's a western that takes place in outer space. And having there be
It's
kind of
final frontier. Yeah.
it's the final frontier, right? So having characters like Mud kind of floating around, the con men, like it's not and really into the seedy sides of, and that there are colonies out there that are super isolated and forgotten about and not happy places. Like I like the foundation of it. I like the concept of it, and it's the when you get into the specifics of what's driving the story is where it gets problematic. Uh, Mail order brides basically is not, especially when you're forward thinking to the 23rd century. You really hope Star Trek's loaded with things that are stories that are told basically within the constraints of hopefully we get there. Like hopefully these are things that are like issues, or we've overcome a lot of things and gotten there by the 23rd century. Mud's Women is like we're still like, this is really a thing. So that is a problem, but I do like the boundaries where the story kind of lives, I guess. And I do like Roger Carmel as Mud. I think he's so ridiculous and over the top, and chooses the scenery
Yeah, he's
so hard.
perfect for that role. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it comes in handy that I think early in TOS, as we're watching these early episodes, like Shatner's on point as Kirk. Like he's serious
From the very beginning.
He's not cheesy early on at all. Like he's really charismatic. He's totally in command. I think later in the show, season 3, when the writing's not as strong, you can argue, is it Shatner being less great, or is it just the stories aren't as strong, the writing, whatever the reasons are. I think having Mud in Mud's Women so early on when Shatner's so good, and I think the character of Kirk is so well drawn. The counterbalance of that, having Mud be such a wacko, like over the top character against Kirk, who's no nonsense and like really strong, works better than maybe Mud would have been later on when Kirk's a little succumbs to more silly stuff himself. A little later on when you definitely see. I think a change in the way Kirk is written. In season 3, especially towards the back end of season 3. So, yeah, that's kind of my take on Mud's Women. It's a tough one. I never totally have an easy. That's one of the tough ones for me with grading, like putting a letter grade on. I kind of envy you being able to just kind of slot them and not put a point on like where do you put it on the spectrum. in terms of like a grade, because part of me wants to give it like a D or a D minus for all the reasons that it would make sense to do that, and part of me is like, God, there's stuff in it that I'd like that makes it feel like that's too low. But when I talk about it, I'm always like, I get self conscious, and I'm like, is it really a C minus, or is it, am I being like way too nice?
Yeah, well, it's tough because I kind of carry over stuff from when I used to do like see it or skip it stuff. Like
Mm-hmm.
I would say I keep mentioning this example, but it's a perfect example for like if I go through Deep Space Nine, I have to watch Storyteller. It's a bad episode, but it still has some good elements in it, and I think that's a mark of all Star Trek is that's just Star Trek in general. Is some of these bad episodes like we're gonna get to in season 3 and sometimes in season 2 of TOS, there's going to be bad episodes that we have to find some good elements to do.
Yeah.
So,
No, totally agree, and especially in TOS, I think we find that a lot because so much of TOS, eventually along the way in these other shows, echoes into, and especially now, like with Discovery and Strange New Worlds, like this stuff continues to like live on, and some of this becomes essential viewing. Really, if you're going to look at it as like a holistic, you know, story, like you kind of need to know who Mudd is. Or it helps to know like where Mudd came from, and you know what the significance of him coming back and being featured in Discovery is. Yeah. What went into that? Like we have the same top 3, for example, top 4 even. Was that an easy choice? Or were you pretty locked in with Balance of Terror, or did you toy with the Menagerie, Arena, Corbomite? Like, how far ahead is Balance of Terror to you?
miles.
Really?
It's the clearest number 1, I think, from my money. I think the other 2 could probably be interchanged, or 2 or 3 could be interchanged. I would maybe entertain Arena for me being in that top 3, just because I really love.
You like Arena a lot.
I really love Arena, but I don't know. Just I think maybe the Menagerie is kind of solidified into 2 just because of Strange New World, of Discovery, and how those shows have changed this episode. 50 some odd years later, is making a change to an episode, which I really do love. But yeah, I think top 2 are pretty solidified. I think 4 or 5 could definitely be switched around for me, possibly, and for future rewatches, see how they change. But yeah, I feel confident where my picks are, ranks are, I guess. Round picks.
Yeah, I think it's funny that, especially if my next question, which I definitely still want to talk about, was going to be how much do you find yourself thinking about Strange New Worlds and even Discovery a little bit, watching these episodes? Like, does it come into play, or are you kind of consciously thinking about it? But yeah, if you want to touch on that. But the thing I was going to point out real quick is like both of us with Bounce of Terror and the Menagerie at the top. Those are the 2 episodes, at least with Strange New World season 1. Like last night, full disclosure, I kind of off the beaten path. I didn't want to keep going any further with TOS, knowing we were going to do this today. I watched Quality of Mercy again, as I find myself doing a lot, and it's the Menagerie and Balance of Terror play so heavily into that episode. And I watched, as I'm watching it, in that last scene between Pike and Spock, talking about how much they mean to each other. Like, it's impossible to watch the Menagerie now and not think about that scene. Like, that's like a direct line.
You get it.
Mm-hmm.
Because before I was like, I don't buy this kind of Spock, really.
That he would throw away his career for this. Right.
Yeah. But now, I definitely get it. After Strange New Worlds.
Well, I think it's not even just... Because Spock doesn't even really know what Pike went through. He knows... He's gathering that Pike knows something... It has some window into what might happen if he tries to cheat death or cheat this disaster coming his way. But he doesn't know the specifics. But I think just seeing them serve together through Strange New Worlds and seeing how deep that friendship goes and how that connection works informs that decision Spock makes in the Menagerie too. Like even without that scene, I think if you haven't gotten to Equality of Mercy yet and you watch the Menagerie, I think you've seen enough to be like, yeah, this guy has history. Like he had a close relationship with the guy who came before Kirk.
Yes, bad baggage. Yeah.
Yeah, and feels deeply connected to the guy sitting in that wheelchair. And I think just Strange New World's existence helps the Menagerie, but certainly that last scene in Equality of Mercy, or second to last scene, I guess it is, really makes an impact too. And then of course the Romulan stuff is obvious with the Balance of Terror as a connection. But I don't know. I mean, that would have been the same top three for me without Strange New Worlds or Equality of Mercy existing. But they're pretty well locked in there, I think, at this point for me. At the top.
Yeah. The thing that I would say about TOS is, and I think we were talking about it before, but I just think that the spaces just feels different in TOS than it does in other shows.
Yeah.
So like when we get to see, the darker side of kind of earlier stuff, in TOS, in Discovery, and even in Enterprise with Bounty and stuff like that, it's just it feels different than it does, like say in TNG era, and I don't know if that's maybe the topics that each show handles, or it's just how different that space feels. But I just think it feels less explored and it feels dangerous, kind of in its early time. Whereas like I feel safer, and maybe that's just my perspective on TNG, but I feel safer, even to some extent, on Voyager.
Yeah.
Than I do in, TOS and in Enterprise and some of these other shows.
I agree. I think TOS is the best at depicting space as truly the final frontier. Like I totally buy. I'm right there with them that as they're pushing out in further into unexplored space, that they have no idea what they're going to come across. And I think some of it comes back to what you said kind of first, the fact that they come across these entities frequently who are so much further advanced than us. It's not like TOS does well is, I mean, for a show that usually depicts aliens as no makeup humans, like people who just look like humans living on another planet, they are probably the most successful at conveying how strange the and how different alien life is bound to be out there. Like I think I mean, I'm not meaning this as like a slight on the Next Generation or the other shows, but when TOS meets an alien society or something other out there, it's not usually somebody who looks like a human with a wrinkle on a nose who has just like a slightly different perspective on government or how to deal with other cultures. Like it's not usually that. It might be Trelane or it might be the Gorn, like it makes it feel more dangerous. I really do feel like that. I think the oldest show, the most original of the shows in terms of generating all this stuff, is the one that's the most successful at depicting space as truly like the unknown. And it's well done. I mean, I don't think they've ever completely replicated that feeling somehow, some way in all these years and all the technology and advancing this world building. Maybe it's because of the world building not really being there, that it's just one thing and that it's not this like huge
built.
thing.
Yeah.
It's just its own, interesting. Let's see what else might stand out here. Let's see. We have what about did any of the episodes, and you obviously weren't ranking last time, so you don't have like a comparison or anything, but did you feel differently, either up, down, on anything? Were you surprised by the way you reacted to any episodes in terms of like
I think
liking it more or less than you remember?
I had to push away some stigma and perspective on an episode based on the production value.
Mm-hmm.
So you mentioned Shore Leave. That's a great example. I came into that saying, oh yeah, it's Roger Rabbit, the guy, that's it. But it's not as bad as I thought of. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I came into the episode with trying to push away those types of perspectives on really writing off an episode based on the production value. I feel like I've got to reformat how I watch an episode in TOS because of that. I feel like that's really in the back of my mind. Like if I come up on, I don't know, I could still use Shore Leave
Sure.
as an example, but I just got to push that away and say, hey, this is definitely going to be different and less than some of these episodes that I'm watching right now, because right now we're watching a 50 some odd show and then a brand new show with Lower Decks, so
Yeah.
it's hard to be able to
True.
keep those perspectives out of my mind while I'm watching and just look at it with fresh eyes and give it a chance before I write it off.
Yeah, I agree. Real quick, I realized we missed Jeff's in the room, Jimmy77's in the room, and Jeff made a comment talking about early on in our conversation, which kind of plays into some of the stuff you were just touching on with Shore Leave. He says, what helps me to think with TOS is like production values and watching something that's 50 some years old. Is try to think of it more as a play than a modern show. You have to use a little imagination to sometimes come at it from the story point of view more than a visual, realistic point of view. Like, think of it as, and I've said that too myself, like, if you are looking at it like a stage play where, obviously production values are very limited by their nature. If you're watching a production on a stage, they're asking you for your suspension of disbelief and for you to kind of fill the set with your imagination a little bit. And that has always helped me too. It's a depiction of something, not necessarily like a photograph of something. It's kind of a weird thing you have to twist your brain into calibrating for, but it helps me to connect dots between the original series and Strange New Worlds and Discovery too. Like that, these are depictions that might not completely align, but the gist of them are consistent. And if you work at it and you squint and tilt your head a little to the right, you can make it work, but and that's okay. It's a byproduct of something being good and consistently produced for 50 some years. It's naturally going to happen. But yeah, Shore Leave is one of the more interesting episodes from my own experience of the first handful, because I think if I went back to like rewatch the original and could find what I tweeted, I think I might have given it a C, and I gave it a B plus this time. I think last time I gave it a B, so it's grown on me. I feel like I maybe was overcompensating in the early days of rewatching and sharing on Twitter. I loved Shore Leave as a kid for all the reasons that it would be obvious to love Shore Leave as a kid. It's light, it's fun, it's got like a whimsical musical score.
But again, it's one of those episodes where it's like these higher beings have created this, which is such a mark of season 1.
Yes, exactly. Even that, it wasn't one that came to mind when I'm thinking of Charlie X from No Man's Gone Before, Squire Gothis, as the omnipotent aliens. But yeah, Shore Leave's right there with it. They stumbled into like an amusement park that's for more advanced.
Exactly.
The humans are like, what are we doing? What's happening here? And it's just designed as an amusement park. It does fit right in there. And there's some kind of scary stuff in it. Like McCoy dies, and for a little bit it seems like he's dead, and that's a heavy swing to take early on there. And if you put yourself in the mindset of watching it in 1966, 1967 when it's originally airing, DeForest Kelley's not in the main credits. The show doesn't have any history. You don't know where it's going. Maybe he is dead. If you're watching it for the first time, maybe they killed him off. And
it's a nice dose of reality, because it's like,
mm-hmm.
you could kind of get lulled into maybe this is something's going on wacky.
Yeah.
But then it's like, boom, that happens.
Yeah. And even if you think of it from the perspective of like future Star Trek, how many times in different various shows do you get, even in TOS it happens, like, this is obviously an illusion. The key to it is to like believe it's an illusion and like stand there in the face of it and let it happen. And it's obviously not real. McCoy tries to do that with the Horseman and gets stabbed and is dead. Like, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
That's that's like wow. I mean, it's got some heft to it. There's some really good Kirk backstory with Finnegan and like it being picked on as an underclassman at the academy. There's a Starfleet Academy uniform that Finney's wearing. Finnegan, not Finney. Um, so there's some good world building in Shore Leave. We get some good backstory. It's cool to see. It's kind of an establishing feature of the show that Shore Leave's a thing, that the crew gets tired and you got to find a way to get some R&R, and that's going to be something that's featured on the show. So I'm more forgiving of Shore Leave. I think I really was like overcompensating for like, oh, I just like this as a kid, and the what you mentioned at the beginning, the rabbit and the Alice in Wonderland stuff, like that's silly, but it's pretty good. I think it's a pretty solid episode, and it really stands out as kind of the first breath of fresh air, as like a lighter tone in those early episodes as well. I think it's. I think I mentioned in my review. I feel like it's kind of like the thing that establishes that Star Trek can do that. That it can shift tone and be lighter or heavier, because up until that point, it's a pretty heavy show.
And you're coming off of Balance of Terror.
Yeah, yeah. I think
know,
it
like,
actually works in the area.
I know it's yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it does.
Yep. What's more tense than that? Like coming out of that situation. Like if you're watching it in sequence, like, you would need shore leave after Balance of Terror. You know, you need a vacation. Yeah. Which of the three main characters, of the big three, do you think early on here are you drawn to the most? I know you're usually going to say Kirk, but would you stick with that right now, given the 18 episodes that you've watched? Does Kirk feel like the character that?
Yeah, I would say so. He feels like traditional what we know Kirk. He's really good from the very beginning. But I think that's not knocking the other two. I think they do both feel really good and both have some really good moments. I think all three of them really feel like
Yeah.
they're true characters.
Mhm.
I guess I'm more interested in maybe the doctor, because technically he's the ship's surgeon. So is he the chief medical officer, or is he the surgeon, or is there multiple, chief medical officers on the Enterprise? Because
Good question.
there's some other questions like that where I'm like, it's those small little details that they didn't have, almost 60 years of this franchise going on to go off of to make sure it's right. So, but with Strange New Worlds, it begs the question, like, was he
What
the
happens?
ship's surgeon?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah, Dr. Mbenga is the chief medical officer for Pike, according to Strange New Worlds, and Dr. Mbenga we're going to see in TOS in seasons 2 and 3. So he's on the ship. So what? Does Mbenga step down? Does he not want to be like? How does that work? I'm sure Strange New Worlds has opportunities ahead as that show rolls along to kind of maybe answer that question. I think I'm sure they will, just knowing what kind of show that is and what they seem to be interested in. I really feel like Strange New Worlds is like aiming to be like ending at a point like where you clearly see TOS. Like I'm sure that's their aspiration, to be like the end point of Strange New Worlds is the beginning point of the original series. So questions like that I'm sure will get touched on. But yeah, I mean it's definitely interesting. And I do, to answer my own question from earlier, I do kind of, it's impossible not to find myself thinking about Strange New Worlds. It definitely pops into my head in some of these episodes, like little things. It's impossible not to have Chapel in mind with like what are little girls made of. That's definitely to me like the one that is the most interesting difference. Like Jess Bush is such a different, is such a different personality, different performance than Majel Barrett. It's a kind of a different take on the character. So that's definitely like in my mind as I'm watching some of these early episodes when Chapel does show up. And of course Uhura and Spock, but it's doing what it's intended to do. I think, like I've said many times with Discovery, like it's adding new nuance and new things to like look at these episodes. They feel kind of fresh and new again, and watching with like a little bit of a different expectation and mindset. And I appreciate that as somebody who's seen these episodes a lot in my life.
Yeah.
Any others that we haven't, like some of those first five we kind of touched on in our kickoff, where no man's gone before, Man Trap, Charlie X. We definitely talked in pretty good detail about those first five episodes.
Mm-hmm.
We've touched on Arena, we've touched on Galileo 7, certainly Shore Leave. A little bit on Squire of Gothas. We touched on what I think we both really like about that episode. I think the most interesting thing about Squire of Gothas, in addition to the twist of it's an adolescent, is how similar, this has long been talked about, how similar Trelane is to Q. Like, just down to, like, the dialogue. When Trelane shows up on the bridge in that moment after they first escape the planet, Kirk's dialogue to Trelane's, like, identical to what Picard says to Q. Get off my bridge, and, get off the ship. That, like, the barbs that go back and forth between them are really similar to Picard and Q. And Q is clearly a inspiration of that has grown out of Trelane. How did that episode sit with you beyond the effective twist? I think that is pretty core to that episode's personality.
Yeah, it was hard not to make the leap to this is just a Q, but just developing the
yeah. That's always been the theory that it's the Q continuum and it's baby Q.
Yeah. For me, it was a good episode. I think the twist makes it. Again, I think this is kind of more of a lighthearted type of episode, so I like that.
Yeah,
Star Trek can go there, and so and I feel like the crew has a lot of things to do in it, but again, it's hard not to think that this is just a counter at Farpoint, just retelling or pre-telling, I guess, if that's a word.
Definitely teeing it up.
Yeah. So.
Yeah,
that's my thoughts on it.
Spock's got some good dialogue in it that I always like. There's a scene when they all come down to the planet, I think the second time, and there's the spread of food and wine and everything, and Spock's got that dialogue about, it's not really fascinating that it doesn't have any taste. It's just interesting because it's expected. There's nothing unexpected about it. That he has all the aesthetics, but none of the substance. Spock's got some classic, establishing the kind of thing Spock would say. What would a Vulcan say in a situation like this? Really well done in that. But yeah, to me, I agree with everything you said. I enjoy it. I think it's really good. It's got some really strong qualities. I gave it a B. It's not like at the top of my list, but I enjoy it every time, and it's interesting for all the reasons we've kind of touched on, especially knowing what Q becomes. But I think that pretty well does it. We're coming up on an hour here, and we've, I think, touched on just about every episode between this and if you go back and you watch our kickoff episode. I think we've at least spent a couple minutes on just about every one of these episodes. And we're going to continue to do this. Like I said at the very beginning, I'm really looking forward to kind of tracking our rewatch outside of just a quick check-in at the beginning of that's worked really well for us over the years, as we've kind of been on different shows to kind of just quick thoughts on highlights and things like that. But I think every few episodes of Trek Live, we're going to do something similar to this. It's going to get harder and harder to like fit bigger numbers of rankings on the screen, so I don't know how we'll do like visual aids. We'll have to get creative. Yeah. But we're gonna keep trying. We're gonna keep checking in and talking about these different episodes and how we're feeling about our rewatches as we get into new seasons and new sections of all these shows.
Yeah, I'm excited for it. I like that Bill and I are trying to do our best to stay
Relatively
close.
synced. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we'll try to continue to do that, hopefully, and we'll keep being able to do these updates like this. So I'm excited for it.
Yep. I think we can announce that we're probably, at least for the little bit of a time being, maybe for a little while here, we're going to pretty much be bi-weekly here on Trek Live, to buy us a little bit of breathing room for a couple of technical things on the production end of things. So we're going to be back, not next weekend, but the following, with a non-rewatch update topic. Like, we'll find a specific thing to touch on and then we'll double back to this rewatch update probably maybe in about a month. I think maybe once a month, kind of hitting on this is probably a sensible thing to do. So stay tuned for that. If our plans on that change down the road, be sure to let you know. But at least for a little while here, I think bi-weekly is going to be the way to go.
But there's still a lot of Trek out there. There's new episodes of Lower Decks. There's Star Trek Day that's coming up. There's a Trek After Dark in the works.
Yes.
So it's definitely not gonna be a quiet time for Trek fans.
No, and I guess this will be a good chance. Next week we have a Trek After Dark scheduled. So if you stumble into this and you're not a member of the Trek Live Discord server, Trek After Dark is a casual hangout that we have on that server. We're going to do it on September 10th. That's next Saturday, 2 days after Star Trek Day, when it's probably fair to assume that we're going to have some fairly notable pieces of news coming out, trailers, maybe some idea of what replaces Star Trek Picard on the docket of shows. Hopefully, maybe, possibly. So there's a lot to talk about there. If you're interested in taking part in something like that, a casual get together with like-minded Star Trek fans, and if you like what we do here on Trek Live, shoot me a DM on Twitter at TrekFan4387. I can get you invited and on board so that you're well informed when we're planning on doing stuff like that. We run surveys if we're thinking we're going to do it, to try to find a date and a time that makes sense for as many of our members as possible, so it's collaborative as much as it can be. And we're hoping to get back into a rhythm with that even, and having maybe one a quarter to kind of check in and give everybody a chance to get together and chat. If that's interesting to you, shoot me a DM on Twitter, and we'll get you on board.
So you guys know the drill. The discussion doesn't have to stop here. Again, Bill mentioned it. Twitter. I'm going to post these on Twitter, these rankings on Twitter. Also going to post them on our Discord server. There's some great discussion, not just about rankings, but about anything you can think of. So definitely check that out.
Yep.
And we'll see you guys next time.
Jeff Stone says in 1 month Bill will be around season 6 of DS9. No, those days are over, Jeff. I can't hang.
We'll see. Kind of the jury might be still out.
that would be, if I'm in DS9 season 6 by next month, people should make sure I'm okay, make sure that I still have a job and that I'm okay in every other aspect of my life. So yeah, a little longer than that, but we'll get there. Yeah. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for watching, and take care. We'll see you in a couple weeks.